There was no enemy waiting across the battlefield, no war drums echoing in the distance, no formation of shields preparing to clash, only silence. After years of conquest, after victories that had shattered empires and rewritten the map of the world, the army of Alexander the Great stood still, facing something far more dangerous than any opposing force, themselves. The order had been given: advance. It was a command that had carried them across deserts, through mountain passes, into the heart of the greatest empire of their time. A command that had never been questioned until now. At first, it looked like hesitation, a moment of rest after a brutal campaign. But moments turned into minutes, and minutes into something heavier: stillness, no movement, no preparation, no obedience. For the first time in his campaign, the man who had defeated kings and broken armies stood before a force he could not command. Not Persia, not India, not an enemy, but the will of his own army. And in that silence, the most dangerous battle of his life began. To understand why that moment mattered, you have to understand how far they had come. For nearly a decade, this army had marched without pause. From the moment they crossed into Asia, their lives had been defined by movement, battle, and victory. Each campaign led to another. Each success pushed them deeper into lands they had never known. They had followed Alexander the Great through heat, through cold, through cities that resisted and empires that collapsed under the weight of his strategy. And then they reached India. At the Battle of the Hydaspes, something changed. The enemy they faced was different. King Porus did not fight like the Persians. The battlefield itself felt unfamiliar. Rivers swollen with rain, unstable ground, and forces that introduced a new kind of fear: war elephants. Massive, unpredictable, and capable of breaking formations that had never failed before. Even in victory, the cost was heavier. The battle was not clean. It was chaotic. It demanded adaptation at every moment. And beyond that battle, there was no sign of an end. Only more territory, more unknown kingdoms, more enemies who would not fight the same way. Victory had not stopped, but something else had begun to take its place: exhaustion, distance, and a growing sense that the war might never end. Eventually, the army reached a place that felt less like another step forward and more like a final line: the Hyphasis River. Beyond it lay lands that stretched into uncertainty, regions described only through stories and fragments, kingdoms rumored to possess armies even larger than those they had already faced, forces said to include thousands of war elephants waiting deeper within the subcontinent. For Alexander the Great, this was not a warning. It was an invitation. Every unknown territory represented something to be conquered. Every distant horizon was another step toward a legacy that would surpass all others. He had built his campaign on momentum, on the belief that there was always another victory ahead. But his army no longer saw it that way. To them, the river was not a gateway. It was a boundary. They had marched farther than any army from their homeland. They had fought battles that should have ended them. They had crossed into lands where everything, from the climate to the enemy, was unfamiliar. And now, standing at the edge of the unknown, the question was no longer about victory. It was about survival. Not can we win, but how much more can we endure? When the order came to prepare for crossing the river, something shifted, not in chaos, not in violence, but in silence. The soldiers did not assemble. They did not move forward. They did not prepare for battle. They simply remained where they were. This was not the kind of rebellion history often records. There were no raised weapons, no open defiance, no attempt to overthrow their king. Instead, it was something far more powerful: collective refusal, a decision made not through words, but through stillness. Alexander the Great addressed them, as he had so many times before. He spoke of their victories, of the empires they had defeated, of the glory that awaited them if they continued forward. He reminded them of who they were, an army that had never been stopped. Before, those words had ignited something unstoppable, but now they fell into silence. No cheers, no renewed energy, no belief. What followed was something even more extraordinary. One of his generals, Caenus, stepped forward, not in defiance, but in truth. He acknowledged Alexander's greatness. He did not question their victories, but he spoke for the men. They were exhausted, not just in body, but in spirit. They had given everything to the campaign, and they had reached a point where even victory was no longer enough to push them forward. This was not rebellion driven by ambition. It was resistance born from limits. And for the first time in his campaign, Alexander faced something he could not defeat with strategy or courage: the will of his own army. Faced with this moment, Alexander did not respond with force. Instead, he withdrew. For days, he separated himself from his army, retreating into isolation as he considered his next move. This was not a battlefield where formations could be adjusted or tactics could be refined. This was a moment of decision, one that would define the future of his campaign. He could continue. He could demand obedience, force the army forward, push them across the river into the unknown. But an army that moves without belief is not an army that wins. And he understood that. For the first time, control was no longer absolute. To advance risked breaking the very force that had carried him across continents. To turn back meant accepting a boundary, a limit to how far even he could go. It was a choice between ambition and reality. And after days of silence, he made his decision. The campaign would not continue east. Instead, the army would turn back, marking the end of their expansion not with defeat in battle, but with recognition of something greater than conquest: human limits. The mutiny at the Hyphasis River did not end the legacy of Alexander the Great, but it changed its direction. Until that moment, his campaign had moved with unstoppable momentum, each victory leading to another, each conquest pushing the boundaries of the known world further outward. After this, that momentum broke. The army would continue to fight. They would secure territories, reorganize, and return west with the power they had already taken. But the dream of endless expansion, the idea that there was always another world to conquer, had come to an end, not because of an enemy, but because of exhaustion. Because the men who had built the empire had reached a point where even victory was no longer enough. And in that moment, a truth emerged that defines every empire in history. Power is not just about how far you can go. It is about how long you can sustain it. And even the greatest conqueror the world has ever seen could not conquer that. If you want to understand how empires rise, expand, and reach their limits, subscribe for more cinematic war stories. Because in history, the greatest battles are not always fought against enemies.